Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes, good. My name is Herb Schellenberger. I am the moderator of this session on organizing. Thank you all for joining us and looking forward to our conversation. Yeah, I'm guessing people have probably attended some other sessions, but we have a captioner and ASL interpreters, and I'll be moderating the discussion with our guests. We also encourage your comments and questions and feedback in the chat, and we will have a portion of our time later to respond to those questions. But we're going to start off with our panelists who will introduce themselves. And I just wanted to say also before we start off, due to the nature of the kind of discussion and ongoing potential negotiations between some organizations, some of the panelists may at times have to sort of say that that's like a question that they can't answer or something like that. We're very aware of like kind of the boundaries that are being set there, and of course that's not any problem for our discussion. Yeah, so I just wanted to put that out there. Again, my name is Herb Schellenberger. I'll do a little more of an intro for myself later, but I wanted to start off with our panelists, Kristal Sotomayor and Eddie Hustleby, who are here. They are IDA employees and also members of the Documentary Workers Union. So it'd be great if you two could introduce yourselves and a little bit of the background of the DWU.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Herb, so much. My name is Eddie Hustleby. I use he, him pronouns. I'm calling you from LA, from Chumash land. And yeah, I would like to give a brief, physical description, audio description of myself. I'm a mixed race, younger individual with a white shirt, mid-length hair, sitting in front of a bookshelf and some framed documents on the wall behind me. And let me pass it to Kristal to do an intro before we get into our union.
Hello, good morning. My name is Kristal Sotomayor. My pronouns are they and she. I'm based in Philadelphia, which is Lenape land, but right now I am also at the CWA office here with my colleague Eddie. A physical description, I'm a Latinx person with red hair, curly red hair, big hoops, floral shirt, and behind me are bookshelves with our CWA signs. So thank you so much. Very excited to be here.
And Herb, do you want us to introduce our union now, or should we go to each panelist first?
I think it'd be fine to do that intro right now. Yeah, thanks.
Awesome. Yeah, me and Kristal are representatives from Documentary Workers United, which is under the Communication Workers of America Local 9003. We're very excited to be here on this panel and talk. We'll give a brief intro of our union. We'll try to keep it to below 5 minutes or so. Just give a little background on why we started our union and everything like that. So going back to December of 2021, we had 4 of our colleagues resign from leadership positions at IDA. And we felt that at the time, the leadership wasn't really satisfactory in their responses, addressing the reasons why these individuals left, why they decided to quit. And they were, not responsive to our inquiries or questions regarding this factor. And we all agreed as a staff, after weighing a lot of different options, really, as a means of last resort, we decided to initiate this process of forming a union. And because we reached the conclusion that we needed the structure and power of this union to advocate for us in an environment where we felt largely unsupported. And now, as of April 2022, our union was, or a little while ago in April, of this year, our union was voluntarily recognized by IDA leadership after weeks of discussion. And also at the time, previously before April, they had hired the anti-union law firm Safe Earth Shaw, which we believe, thanks to the kind of public pressure we were able to put on management, that they have dropped that law firm. So we've gone through a couple of chapters already, but I wanted to pass it to Kristal to talk about a bit of what we aim to accomplish with our union.
So I'm going to share with you a little bit of our mission statement, some of our goals for the union: to prioritize staff concerns, set reasonable timelines / benchmarks for the organization, fixing IDA's public image over fixing IDA's public image, to continue to respect the authority of the IDA employee handbook, create a clear process for reporting issues to leadership in good faith without the fear of repercussions, create accountability for situations where IDA leadership diminishes current and former staff, including foul language, aggressive outbursts, sharing confidential information, etc., in both private and public settings, transparency in the promotion and hiring processes within an equitable and sustainable leadership / department structure, along with a fair and competitive pay scale for all staff members, involvement of relevant staff members in crucial departmental decisions, fair compensation for additional work staff takes on to accommodate for vacant positions, protection against scrutiny for supplemental work done outside of IDA work hours, protections of the staff's executive authority over their organizational duties as outlined in their job descriptions, commitment to diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion, DEAI, long-term. And now Eddie is going to talk a little bit about where we're at now.
Yes, and just if you want to read more of that mission statement, you can find it at documentaryworkersunited.org. We really have a lot of information we've kept on the website there. But yeah, I just wanted to share a bit of the facts of the last really 6 to 8 months. Since January of 2022, 18 out of the pre-existing 23 staff members have left the organization. And so there's been a serious, gap in our organization. And we really want to give a moment and shed some thanks for Hansen Bursick and Badatri Chaudhary, who were members of our organizing committee and bargaining committees. And we owe them a lot for all the hard work they've done in getting us to where we are now. And we are currently in bargaining. So this is a process where, unfortunately, we can't speak about specific proposals that we are writing or that are in consideration. But since we are in bargaining, I think it's important to say that we are really hopeful for a thorough and speedy bargaining process. Here's a summary of what has happened so far, just the facts. We have written a total of 83 proposals. 15 of them were sent on June 13th of this year. 13 were sent on July 27th. 23 were sent on August 23rd. And 32 were sent on September 9th. And since we've sent those proposals, we've only had 2 meetings so far with IDA leadership, with a third on the books. So we look forward to the bargaining process, happening in good faith, and we're hopeful that we'll have a signed contract by the end of the year. So I'm going to pass it to Kristal one last time to just talk about how you can support our union.
Yes, so if you are in person at Getting Real, please stop by our CWA booth. Our local 9003 staff member, Pandy Allen, will be there on Thursday at DWA. Please stop on by and, show up with our swag in support of our work. We also ask folks to continue to ask questions of IDA leadership and demand answers. We want to give a shout out in particular to Documentary Producers Alliance and ADOC on their statement supporting the staff during Getting Real. And thank you so much to everybody else who's voiced their support for the union as well. We hope others follow their example and ask for better working conditions in our industry as a whole. And we also ask that you follow us on social media. We are at IDA Workers Union on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Yes, thank you so much for.
That's really great. And yeah, we'll also repeat those websites and socials at the end. And if anyone also wants to pop those in the chat, that'd be very handy too. I'm going to turn it over to John Klacsmann, who is archivist at Anthology Film Archives in New York, and also a member of the Anthology Film Workers Union. Hi, John.
Hi, thanks for having me for this conversation. My name is Klacsmann. I'm joining you all from my apartment in Brooklyn, New York. I use he, him pronouns. As far as a visual description, I have brown hair, I'm white, I have a long brown beard with some white patches, and I'm wearing a red shirt. A little bit of a background on our unionization at Anthology. We're a little bit further along in that we already have our contract. Our contract started this year on July 1st. But as far as the timetable of our organizing, it began in 2020 during quarantine. By early 2021, I think our entire staff had signed union cards, and we asked to be voluntarily recognized. We signed a letter to management with our names, so it wasn't even an anonymous ask. Everyone was on board. We were not voluntarily recognized by management and our board of trustees, which means we had a National Labor Board election in July 2021. We unanimously won, which wasn't a surprise. We began bargaining in August 2021, and that culminated in our contract, like I said, which began on July 1st of this year. As far as what happened during bargaining, we did hold a one-day strike on March 31st of this year, where our theaters and our offices were shut down for the day, and we had a picket line and a demonstration. In my personal opinion, that pushed along the bargaining, leading us to eventually getting our contract. Things had been a little bit, in my opinion, stalled up until then. So that was the turning point, in my opinion, as far as bargaining goes. I think I'll just leave it at that for now.
That's great. Thanks very much, John. And to sort of introduce myself, Herb Shellenberger. I use he, him pronouns. I live in Pennsylvania, unceded Lenape land, but I'm joining you today from Los Angeles. And I have sort of experience in this area as a former member of the PCS Tate United Union, which represented workers at the Tate Modern and Tate Britain museums in London. I worked as a retail staff member there, you know, kind of supplementarily supporting my kind of curatorial and film programming practice. And in 2020, during the pandemic and in between lockdowns, the Tate Museum announced sort of mass redundancies of workers in my sector, which was retail, catering, and some workers in the publishing, which were incorporated under a sort of profit-making wing of the business rather than the kind of nonprofit museum workers business. And of course, these things are, you know, in UK law, you can imagine they're separated kind of for tax reasons and tax status, but there are, you know, also many ways in which some employers potentially like to kind of divide and keep workers sort of away from each other. And in such a large institution like that, it can be easy to, you know, not be able to connect with people working in different parts of the museum. And in August 2020, we went on strike to oppose these mass redundancies of the lowest paid and most diverse workforce in the museum, sort of arguing that, you know, we shouldn't be the ones to pay the whole price for, you know, what was going on in the pandemic. Our strike lasted for 42 days, 6 weeks, and that was daily picket lines at the staff entrances of both museums. It was regular protests, marches. We had kind of participatory performances. We had guest speakers, some of which were artists like Mark Leckey, writers like The White Pube, or Ash Sarkar, Owen Jones, and Jeremy Corbyn were guest speakers in these protest events that we did right outside of the museum entrances. And in a way, we were sort of putting together kind of a counter program that we felt was in some ways just as rich as what was being offered artistically inside of the museum. Ultimately, it was a tough fight, and we weren't able to prevent the redundancies of these workers, but we were able to secure them more pay than they would have gotten without our organizing. And so, yeah, I'm speaking from experience in moderating this panel, even though I've since relocated from the UK back to the United States, but I'm still involved in other, perhaps less official organizing and solidarity. And that's something that we'll touch on later in the conversation too. So right now I wanted to sort of move on to, we have a number of kind of different topics and questions. And I wanted to ask Kristal and Eddie, as well as John, in their own kind of contexts. You know, you spoke a little bit already about like kind of why you determined that a union was necessary in your workplace. I wanted to ask you about, like, from there, what were the sort of concrete steps that you took to organize with your coworkers?
Yes, I definitely love to answer that question. Well, Kristal laid out our mission statement earlier, and it really was for those reasons that we made the decision. We made the call to unionize. Like I said, it was sort of a means of last resort, but we had general consensus, entire consensus around the idea of unionization. So we definitely made the decision and we went for it. But the actual process of organizing and you know, getting that consensus like solidified involved a lot of meeting offline outside of work hours to discuss, and also consulting different labor professionals. And like I said, just making sure that we had consensus before we moved forward on anything really did take, you know, a bit of time. And that was, I think, one of the more challenging things was to try to get that consensus in a timely fashion, given the pressures we were under. But we definitely weighed all options before we decided on unionization. And I think that I am glad that we did have, you know, unanimous, you know, support when that decision was reached. But yeah, let me pass it to Kristal as well.
Yes, I definitely want to emphasize that unionizing was the last resort. It was a difficult process for the staff because we're doing all of this unpaid labor outside of work hours to organize the union. We're passionate about the mission of IDA, which is why we chose to do so much unpaid labor outside of work hours. I mean, we're meeting once a week, twice a week sometimes. And you have to think we're in different time zones. Sometimes I've stayed up until past 10 o'clock my time and Eastern Standard because everybody else is in Pacific Standard. We believe strongly that the union is the best way to ensure the mission of IDA continues to be upheld and that staff get better treatment. We're doing this for the field as a whole, and we really do encourage other people that are interested in unionizing and really like talking more about the process, how those meetings went about with us, to please reach out to us. Mm-hmm.
That's great. Thanks. Fia, feel free to jump in, John.
Yeah, I didn't talk too much about what led to our unionization, and I can't speak for everyone, but I think something that we all agreed on were low and stagnant wages. So that was very clear, and everyone knew that was a problem at Anthology. I think thinking back to 2020, it was kind of the perfect moment to unionize, and I don't have experience unionizing or organizing outside of COVID, but I think virtual meeting and of course, maybe the increased downtime that people had made it much easier to organize probably than it would have been otherwise. And I do have to shout out a lot of our part-time staff who I believe really began the process even before I was involved. For several months before I was brought in. So, you know, it took a lot of meeting basically every week and going through the staff and contacting each staff member and talking to them about it. Before then getting involved with United Auto Workers, UAW, Local 2110, who we organized with and who we then began meeting with every week. Leading up to signing union cards and asking for voluntary recognition. The thing to keep in mind about Anthology is that our staff is pretty small. So it's changed over time, but it's between 6 and 10 full-time staff and 15 and 20 part-time staff. So we're not a huge organization and we are a nonprofit as well. So I'll just leave it at that, I think.
Thanks. That's really interesting to hear about this kind of specific context and the specific sort of works and steps that it takes. And I'm sure a lot of people are kind of wondering about their own sort of situations. And one thing I wanted to discuss, which we spoke about a little bit when we connected last week, are the differences between sort of official organizing and unofficial organizing. Both of your groups are, you know, parts of unions, the CWA and UAW, and so those afford, you know, kind of like the legal protections that you know come with that. But there's also lots of means of unofficial organizing. I'm thinking of kind of anonymous social media accounts that might be able to sort of spread news and give testimony in different ways. And yeah, I'm interested in just speaking about the pros and cons of both doing things through these official means, and also well, this is again like an open discussion with everyone, and I hope it's something that we can talk about more later as well with the participation of others, you know, about like what unofficial organizing can bring to the table and bring to our efforts as well. Yeah. Any ideas of where to start with that?
Yeah, hopefully it's okay if I hop in here. I definitely don't want to devalue unofficial organizing, because I do think it's really valuable for folks, as you mentioned, those anonymous social media accounts. You know, if, for example, you're a job seeker, you can see those pages and understand what the workplace culture is at that organization or institution, whatever it might be. I think for us personally, the official organizing was appealing because of what you said. It gives a legal framework on, you know, how to move forward to protect employees' rights. You know, like I said, I'm optimistic, and I encourage people that through the unofficial means to spread the word about the conditions that they're under. But, you know, it's a little bit harder. I don't personally have the data. I'm actually curious, you know, to the people in attendance and other panelists, like, have they found that helpful, you know, for protecting or for improving a culture at a certain workplace? I just don't have like the data on that. But we liked unionization because we had consensus And also we knew that it would give a legal framework, a timeline basically on moving things forward. But, you know, I think both are valid, but I am curious to hear more about other people's experiences. But I did want to pass it to Kristal quick as well.
Yes, and I would also say that I think part of our process of deciding to become a union, we were unofficially organizing in our own ways through our discussions with senior leadership to get conditions to change. And we found that that did not work at all. So we decided we need this legal framework because we've already tried the unofficial. So now we have to go the official route. And I also want to say, even if we do get and when we have the legal protections of a union, socially in this industry, you know, you will be targeted for speaking out about working conditions. We understand that we aren't the only organization facing labor concerns and staffing issues. It's a field-wide issue, and it's also a field-wide silencing of this issue. And with the support of allies, we're really thankful to have been successful with our union. We were able to be voluntarily recognized, and we're, you know, working towards a contract right now. But other organizations with similar mass staff resignations have not received the spotlight or the pressure to reform their practices. So we're unsure of what unofficial organizing efforts have happened at some of these larger organizations that are facing these issues. And we're here to talk to any of those staff members at those institutions facing those issues that have not been able to voice their concerns publicly. We believe that our union in particular can set an example for the rest of the industry, for other folks that are also working to support the documentary industry. So yes, again, we're here to help others. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know how much unofficial organizing we did outside of what was already mentioned, as far as talking to management individually, and of course the other members of the staff. There weren't any really anonymous social media accounts or anything that I was aware of. But like I said, everyone was on the same page about the wages being low and stagnant. So that kind of didn't even really need to be discussed. Everyone in the staff and management was aware of that. I think what Eddie said is an important, and it was definitely relevant in our case, in that it set a timetable on things. So it wasn't like a conversation that could be kicked down the road. Like, once we won our election, there was a legal time frame, and we were owed a response, and we had to begin. Management had to begin bargaining with us. So it wasn't something that could be deprioritized, basically reprioritize the needs of the staff, which obviously was very, very useful and important.
That's great. Yeah. I guess I was also just thinking in terms of that, you know, unofficial organizing, whether it is just conversations between coworkers and colleagues, you know, can lead to the official organizing that you guys are talking about. And some, you know, some people may not have enough coworkers to do that, or, you know, like might not exist in a culture where for whatever reason that can happen. And I guess I also wanted to point out here, I'm putting a link in the chat to an article from the Baffler by Dana Koppel, who was part of the New Museum Union in New York, which in really detailed ways, I think illustrates the trajectory from conversations and unofficial organizing to official organizing to, unfortunately, kind of what Kristal mentioned, you know, a case of like targeting staff and sort of retribution from the institution. And there's sort of no shortage of kind of really damning testimony and stories from arts and film institutions, especially kind of over the past couple years. And I think an important part of unofficial organizing and anonymous social media, I'm thinking here of like an Instagram account like Fest Staffer Stories, which I think is really great, is, people who don't have that official voice can share, their own kind of experience and testimony, and hopefully others can, use that to find ways to advocate for them, in whatever way they can. But I think it leads to the next thing that I want to talk about, which is, of course, solidarity. So how can the work that you all are doing within your unions build links with other workers, other groups and movements, let's say locally in the places where you are, or nationally, or even internationally?
I kind of wanted to speak and highlight something that Kristal said, and also, I feel like you echoed here that we may not know what's going on at a given institution, but we had consensus, like kind of unanimous consensus to support our union, but there might be organizations that didn't have that consensus, and I do think that because of that, there is value in the anonymous way of sharing out your concerns. If unionization isn't possible at a given organization because maybe there's one or two people who are staunchly against it or something like that in the group of folks that would be organizing, I think that the anonymous means of sharing out knowledge is very important and does the work to build those linkages, I think, in the struggle beyond just one isolated union group. Like we said, we hope our union sets an example for other people, but there may be people who, for one reason or another, it's just not a pathway forward for them. So I think it is really important to have those technological tools that can build an understanding of the field from the ground up, rather than just hearing what folks in charge have to say. And I'm really curious to learn more about those tools. I think we're finally getting to the point where, like you said, we're still in the middle of bargaining, so we're definitely not set in stone on any way, shape, or form. But we're getting to the point where we can start to really formulate, what are our core. We have our mission statement, but what are the pillars that we're going to be standing for as our union, and how can we build linkages with other like-minded unions and continue our cause. And we could do that, basically the best answer I have is just virtual tools like we've talked about, like Zoom and social media and we use a lot of different groups and technological platforms like that. I don't know, Kristal, do you have any other thoughts on how we technologically spread our word?
I also want to say that I hope that this conversation leads to other people wanting to connect with us as unions, right? Even people that are thinking about, oh, should I be forming a union? Like, what even can I advocate for as a worker? Maybe there isn't a consensus for union. We are examples that can be followed, like all of these unions that are being formed. And so I think that's why these sorts of spaces are helpful for that. I mean, we are also, the documentary industry is an industry of connections. It is an industry of friendships. It's an industry of meeting people and talking to people. So, I think it's just important to make space for those conversations and to allow people to ask questions.
Yeah, to echo that, I would just say talking about it like we're doing now, whether that's publicly or person to person. Any workplace can be unionized, basically, from the small nonprofit experimental film archive and cinema to documentary film workers to cinema workers. Any workplace can be unionized, and unions have never been more popular than they are now. So I think talking about it and giving other people advice who are interested or going through it is the best way to support others.
And we touched on it a little bit previously in your responses, but I wanted to draw out maybe a little more explicitly the idea of organizing during COVID. I think all three of our examples that we've given at Tate, we were on strike in August, September, and the beginning of October 2020. And we were sort of lucky that the lockdown was sort of lifted then, and we could do socially distanced protests, and we made sure to encourage or mandate that they were sort of masked and distanced and things like that. I'm wondering for you all, what sort of obstacles or what sort of opportunities has this time in particular provided your efforts? Yeah.
I feel like I've been going first each time. I mean, does anyone else want to answer first? Okay. I think that I wanted to echo what John said earlier. And I actually do think that since it was COVID and since we all were meeting virtually and I don't want to speak for everyone and say that people had more free time, but, joining up on a Zoom, maybe it wasn't as laborious as driving somewhere to meet, maybe that gave us the opportunity to have a bit more camaraderie, especially when everything started to hit the fan. And we held spaces for, different coworkers to meet on those Zooms outside of work hours and discuss the issues that we were having. And we used, we mentioned this before, but to get a little more detailed, we used like technological platforms to collect anonymous responses, like ranking people's concerns about what was going on. That way we weren't, pressuring anybody or, in a public Zoom setting, kind of expecting everyone to be at the certain like ideological, whatever. We allowed people to anonymously submit their concerns, and we collected those and we used those concerns to build our mission statement, which we shared earlier. And we highlighted each of those top concerns that they had in the presentation of that statement to leadership. But delays, were absolutely a part of the process. We were working across time zones. Some folks, like we said, were staying up till 9 p.m., 10 p.m. at night. It really shows their dedication to this cause. And we were lucky in the sense that we really all coalesced around this idea. We said that it did take a while to get there, but, in the span of things, it was pretty quickly that we've reached this conclusion because it became pretty quickly apparent that there was no other option. So we moved pretty quickly and we had consensus when we were really lucky for that. But, as things went forward, of course, the process got more difficult as more staff departed from the organization. And we're just now at the point where even though the pandemic restrictions have been lifted for a while, we're still just at the point where we're meeting folks in person. For example, we're here at the CWA office. We just met our local rep for the first time in person. So we're definitely still predominantly organizing through virtual means. So that's really all that we're used to. It's all that I've ever done. So of course, I don't really have much to compare it to. But I do think that there were definitely some advantages. And I do agree with the general sort of census I'm getting in the chat and also just in life in general that COVID and the difficult years that we've had in the past have awakened a lot of people to the idea of how things can be better and empowered them with the ability to, have time and space to be able to start carving out those protections for themselves. But yeah, Kristal, do you have anything else you might add?
Yeah, the good thing about COVID is that now everybody knows how to use Zoom, knows how to get, on a chat. We have everybody's phone numbers. So, communication has honestly never been easier. It's so easy to talk to people on Zoom, on Signal, text message, phone calls, all of this stuff. What I will say though is that it's really great to meet people for the first time, especially being a staff member that's on the East Coast, being able to come to California where most of the people are based in Los Angeles now. And so being able to connect with people for the first time has been kind of amazing. And like seeing that people are really tall, I guess, has been really interesting too. But I think it's really provided a lot more advantages than disadvantages, I would say. It's actually made communication significantly easier. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely had never been on a Zoom and rarely done video chat before March 2020. And yeah, I think it made it much easier and much more possible, especially in our organizing efforts when we were still very much in lockdown. People were at home, in 2020 still, and our theater was not, and our workplace was still not reopened. So it was kind of the only way, and I think it made it easy. We also did have a Slack channel for a short period of time, which was useful in that era, leading up to our election, to communicate. So that was another technological thing that was useful. Our strike was in person earlier this year because we were reopened publicly, but we still do a lot of our meetings via the internet. I think it makes it easier for people to attend. People have different schedules. But I will say one of the downsides of it that sort of came up, and again, I don't have experience bargaining. I was on the bargaining committee representing the Anthology film workers when we were doing our contract. I don't have any other experience doing it in person, but our bargaining session was virtually. And something that Maida Rosenstein, who we worked with at UAW 2110, who's a really great union organizer and has been doing it for decades, a really important person in New York City labor organizing. She said a downside of bargaining over Zoom was really that it changed the dynamics quite a bit. So instead of going in person and sitting at a table where there's management on one side and the union on the other side, and you speak and bargain, it was all done sort of like this in a virtual room. And she said the dynamics were very different, and it was in some ways harder because of that. So that's maybe just a downside of virtual.
It's really interesting.
Sorry, I was just going to say, we can't speak about the bargaining process at all, but I could recognize there's been some technological difficulties leading up to getting to that point. Just a little bit of extra work that wouldn't have existed if we had been in person. So yeah, I can agree with John.
I was just going to comment that it's interesting, obviously, hearing about your specific cases and my experience as part of the PCS Tate United. Our union was part of the Public and Commercial Service Union in the UK. And I'm putting a link in the chat here from Freeze magazine, the art magazine, which is like a bit of an explainer to the background, but it actually has importantly some sort of photos and visuals from our protests. And yeah, actually, in contrast to both of the unions that you're representing, our union has been in place for years. I think quite close to Tate Modern's founding around 2000, if not even maybe before, as Tate Britain has been there for longer, and there's a continuity of staff. And so in our strike, we had around 100 people really who were on strike and stopping like a major part of the museum's operations. But that also means that we had really talented people who could, who are also, many of whom are artists, painted signs, which got press attention and photos in newspapers. And, we all have different connections that led to outreach for some of these speakers that I mentioned, and to mobilize our efforts to actually get artists to artists who were represented in the museum's collection to offer statements of support for our organizing and our strike. It's fascinating to hear different kind of capacities and things that are involved there. I think I have two more sort of questions to ask until we get to the questions and discussion period with everyone. So think about what you'd like to ask, and maybe it'll be easier at that time if we ask you to sort of repeat your questions in the chat, just because there's been a really great and lively discussion, but it's a bit hard to keep track of. So I'll give a signal at that point in about 10 minutes. I wanted to ask, both of your groups, who do you sort of consider your peers? What are other kind of interesting groups or initiatives that you've looked to or sort of gained inspiration from within the realm of film, but also kind of the wider like arts and culture sector in terms of worker organizing?
Well, yeah, I think that we have a couple that we just like to shout out quick. I mean, one in particular, just because of our local, it's another union effort in our local that I think is in the midst of bargaining as well, Equality California. So just by default, we've sort of compared our efforts a lot to theirs, and we just wish them the most support and like want to shout them out in their struggle. So show some solidarity there. But as far as film related, nonprofit related institutions or organizations, I think it's important to mention Jigsaw Productions, Film at Lincoln Center Union, and Philadelphia Museum of Art Union. Kristal, I don't know if you have more you'd like to say about any of those.
Yes, in particular, being from Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Museum of Art Union has been fighting for years for a fair contract, and they are not getting a they're not being met at the table, at the bargaining table. They have been on strike now for I think a few weeks. They've been protesting outside of the building, the museum building. It's like one of the most important institutions, art institutions in the entire city, and I really stand with those workers in particular. It's a beautiful museum. The staff works very hard to create programming that supports the entire city, and they deserve fair wages, and staff equity, So I really, really strongly stand with them, being that I'm from Philadelphia and I love the museum.
Yeah, and I think that's a great thing to do, to show up to the picket lines and join your colleagues at other unions when they have a strike. It's really important to do that. You already mentioned it, but Dana Koppel is someone who I definitely followed during the New Museum unionization, which was a much more difficult process than ours was, but that was the sort of big story in New York City at the time, and she's someone whose writing I followed closely, especially afterwards, and then I think in New York that it's sort of a larger ecosystem that we fall into of art museums who began organizing and unionizing, and that continues, and a lot of them do happen to be UAW 2110 as well, so we sort of naturally have a solidarity and partnership among this larger New York City, and now expanding to other cities, unionization effort within art institutions, which I think is now spreading into film and cinema institutions. Film at Lincoln Center did unionize right before us, and they were definitely a big inspiration for me personally. And we knew them, they were friends of ours, so it was very helpful to have people there to talk to during our efforts. And it kind of continues today as far as the film unionization goes. Film Forum has also unionized with UAW 2110 here in New York City, and they're bargaining now, I believe. And then, of course, previously to us, even BAM, Brooklyn Academy of Music, which has a cinema, and of course MoMA has been unionized for a while. They also have a repertory cinema. So it's really sort of a local and now national sort of ecosystem of art museums and cinemas that I look to for inspiration.
I also was kind of just wanted to, we read the news, like everybody else. So I think we also kind of like compared ourselves with like what's happening at Amazon, what's happening at Starbucks. I was just saying recently, Condé Nast, just reached their contract, I believe. So, we were reading everything that's happening nationally as well, and definitely inspired by those efforts.
It's really great. And maybe the last sort of thing to talk about is, organizing as kind of a path to the future, as something that is sort of forward thinking and positive work, in the service of institutional sustainability. So, I think there's sort of one way to potentially look at, the criticism that organizing brings inherent into it, but also to think about, the vision that the work is tied to. So wanted to see if you had anything to talk about in that light.
Yes, I mean, I would say that we started this union broadly saying that we love IDA. We love the work we do here. We strongly support the mission. And honestly, this is my dream job, right? These are our dream jobs. We love being here. We love supporting filmmakers. But I also think at some point, workers know what's best for the organization. We do the work to keep up the institution. We do the work to support the mission, to fulfill the mission, right? We are the people closest to the labor. And I believe the people closest to the labor should be the ones leading and deciding how the future and how change will go for the organization, because we're on the ground, we're closest to the community. We talk with our peers on a daily basis. We understand the minute little things that need to change, all the way to like the big structural issues that need to change. And so I really strongly believe in leadership that promotes equity, that promotes sustainability. And truly, that's what a union is about. It's giving staff power and trying to make sure that there aren't structures that are, top-down leadership to try and ensure that we have a voice and a say in these issues, because we are the ones that are doing all of the labor to make this possible, to make everything possible that this organization does. Mm-hmm. Eddie, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to say as well, though, that I don't think that it's an us versus them issue. I think that within the union effort, both employees and management, basically what you're presented with is an opportunity to build this institutional sustainability and knowledge that you mentioned. I mean, I think that to view it as a positive project, to view it as something that's going to create that stability that we all want, is the way that it should be interpreted and it should be looked at. It's an opportunity for us all. When this happens, it's prompted by the treatment we received, but now we have this opportunity to really build something that's lasting, to build something that's legal and framework, but also it requires the commitment of both the employees and the management to uphold those values, because even after a union is established, it doesn't mean that there won't be difficulties. So I think that it's an opportunity for both employees and management to come together and recognize the importance of living up to their values, to come together and recognize the importance of respecting their workers. It's all opportunities. And of course, this isn't to minimize the struggles we faced. It's just to paint a clear picture that there is a path forward, and this is the path forward that we're pursuing. And we believe it with all our hearts. And I think that, it's an opportunity. It's all opportunities. And we'll keep moving forward. But yeah, I really like to view it that way, as a positive project. It's not something that's purely reactionary. It's something that's ambitious to build like this sustainability that we need.
Yeah, and to echo that, yeah, I think everyone who's involved at Anthology, whether it's the staff or our board or management, believes in the place and wants it to be as good as possible. So I also don't look at it as an us versus them thing. I just think unionization offered the opportunity to prioritize the needs of the staff and put that first among many different priorities, right? And I think that ultimately that leads to a more stable and sustainable organization, which is what everybody wants. If people are getting paid better and they know what their salaries are going to be, and there's a clear contract, people want to stay and they want to work at Anthology. So it's only helps, I think, and making that commitment to the staff is important. I said when we were organizing, Anthology is the staff. Like if you don't have the staff, you don't have the organization anymore. So I think it's of great benefit to everybody involved to have the union, and it was an important process, I think, for long-term stability of our little nonprofit.
At this time, I'd like to sort of open it up to everyone else to ask sort of what questions you have, comments, ideas, suggestions, dreams, hopes. We'll try and go back in the chat as best as we can to see what we can pick out, but also feel free to even just copy something that you had previously pasted in there, or if you have anything fresh as well. There was one here that I was going to try to come back to by Cameron Quevedo. And Cameron, he says he's interested in the idea as to how unionizing or organizing efforts might also spill over to support non-employees that orgs rely on to fulfill their missions. For instance, thinking about the tremendous amount of uncompensated labor that these organizations use via festival screening committees, awards juries, grant review committees, etc. I think that's a really great point to pull out. I don't know if anyone has anything to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I could just say that I think that really the tools that we have are the proposals that we present. So it's really as far as like those who would fall outside of a prospective union, that's like, something that could be debated, within the context of whatever union effort might be, whatever the union effort might be, like, oh, can these people be included? Do we by default have to exclude these certain people? That's always something that could be debated. But, this field does rely a lot on volunteer labor or stipended labor that doesn't really pay that much. So really the tools that we have, like, legal framework tools as a union, is just the ideas and proposals that you would present to management to try and, either prohibit that or, have some sort of additional means to address at least somewhat that problem of underpaid or not paid at all labor, volunteer labor. But it is something that, can be addressed by union, but maybe also, addressed outside of union organizing as a means of, it is a pressure point for us, I would say, because, we definitely feel that all labor should be paid. So, but the best that we can do is really just protect that in the areas that we're working on. But yeah, I am definitely curious and eager to hear more ideas about how to discourage that practice.
If there's nothing else on that, there's another question here. I'll read from Jim Bracker. As you struggle to unionize and develop ways of understanding these situations, is there anyone looking back to unionizing movements of the past? And is the past relevant here? Good question. And Petrus Jackson is just adding on to that by saying, I was in a very old union as a train conductor. It was ineffectual in making needed changes, not in terms of pay rates, but cultural changes, so that trainmen could have lives outside of work without risking being fired.
Anyone can interrupt me answering again, but yeah, I mean, I think as far as like struggles of the past, I mean, I can't point out anything in particular, but obviously we're in entertainment. I mean, we have the history of union organizing and in our industry to look back at and sort of reflect on, and hopefully, I believe we're in a new era of unionization. Just because you have a union, it doesn't mean the union is perfect. It requires, continual demand from those in the union to hold, union leadership, whatever it might be, accountable, and to push it in the direction that they want to go. But yeah, I mean, I think back to the past union struggles in our industries in the 50s and whatnot. And I hope that, those unions continue to be powerful and that more people can be protected in the entertainment industry. And I think a lot of the concerns that we have are concerns that are shared with folks who work in production, whether it's long hours, volunteer labor, like we were talking about. Yeah, there's so many areas of this industry that still need to be protected. So, I mean, we look at the past and the present to kind of inform our opinions on the state of things.
Yeah, I don't know about the history of unionizing within film archives in particular, but obviously unions have had a place within the larger film industry for a long time. So I certainly look to that, and the idea of most or all, maybe one day all of New York City repertory cinemas being unionized, I think is great. As far as past, I think looking back in particular to UAW 2110's history is interesting, because UAW is obviously United Auto Workers, and 2110 is mostly representing more white collar jobs, and they're a technical office and professional union. So it's sort of interesting to understand how that came about. And I think it goes back to organizing that happened among office staff at Columbia University. I am going to drop a really great interview with Maida Rosenstein, who I mentioned earlier, who's a labor organizer at 2110, where she talks about the history, which is really fascinating, I think.
Thanks for that. And yeah, there's been, I think it's really helpful. People are posting links in the chat, and we're definitely encouraging any other reading or anything else there. To get to a DWU specific question from Marjan Safinia, who asks, is your union's power diminished with the reduction in members because staff have continued to leave? And if so, how can the membership and community bolster your efforts? Pamela follows from that, asking, should I withhold signing up and paying new membership dues until they meet your demands?
Thank you so much for your question, and thank you so much for your support. As a union, we are doing this because we love IDA. We want IDA to continue and to thrive. I cannot, ask people to withhold from becoming members because their membership directly supports us as staff, correct? We would hope. So that is not an answer that we can respond to. Our demands are to get our contract signed, and luckily so far we have been bargaining in good faith with the leadership. Of course, if that ends up changing, we would notify our community, but I feel like things have been going fairly well so far. In terms of diminishing numbers of staff, it is kind of a rare case here where so many people have left, so many positions that are union recognized have left, and now there are new positions here at IDA. I would say that has caused some issues for us logistically, trying to figure out who to contact, how we can connect with new people. Some people have only been working at the organization for a few weeks. So, I mean, it has caused issues logistically organizing, making sure people are informed, having people be involved if they want to be involved. But, this union is beneficial to all of the staff members, and we're just holding space and making space for folks that are interested in taking part.
Yeah, and I want to say that although there may have been like confusion and difficulties over, of course, it's been a trial, but there has not been a gap in passion. I will say that every new person that comes into the organization, even as we grieve the loss of like our former workers who used to work here and who meant a lot to us, we have a lot of new workers that you know, we have an obligation and duty to really work towards and help build this collective feeling of belonging inside of our union. So, you know, I don't think that there has been a drop off in passion or support. If anything, I feel like there's, you know, been, obviously we've reached the capacity of our workload. We always want to do more to engage with the public about our issues. And I think that's something that we want to keep prioritizing as things go forward. But I don't think there's ever been a gap in passion. And I think we're really lucky and thankful for that. And we're thankful to all the people who've showed up and had so much support. And I think that, you know, if anything were to change about our circumstance, I think that we have a very involved group of people who really have been supporting us and are on our side. So I think that, yeah, we feel really fortunate. And there's no necessary, like we said, we're in bargaining right now, which is a little bit of a period of hope, you know, of idealism, of presenting ideas and looking forward to the future with optimism. So, you know, we have been voluntarily recognized, and things have moved forward, perhaps not as quickly as we would have liked, but things are moving forward. So in the spirit of things moving forward, we are looking towards, you know, a cooperative and speedy bargaining process, like we said. But we are very thankful to have so many people in our corner, and it means a lot. We really want to say how much it means, and you'll definitely be hearing from us.
Yes, I also wanted to say, I'll just reiterate from the beginning how you can support the union, because we are so thankful for all of our allies and supporters. Really, we've been able to be voluntarily recognized because of our supporters, right? Like that pressure really did help us be voluntarily recognized. We didn't have to go through the process of voting and everything. So again, if you are going to be at Getting Real in person on Thursday at DGA, please stop by the CWA booth. Our local 9003 staff member, Pandy Allen, will be there. Hopefully we can have some stickers or something if folks want to wear that and, you know, physically show your support. We also think it is important to continue to ask questions of IDA leadership and demand answers. I'm definitely giving the shout out to Documentary Producers Alliance and ADOC, who made statements supporting staff members, right? Thank you so much to everybody who has voiced their support, who continues to, you know, ask for better working conditions in our industry as a whole, right? And also, of course, to follow us on social media. We're at IDA Workers Union on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Thank you so much.
That's great. I'm going to try and get to a couple more questions here. We have about 5 minutes. We'll see what we can do. Jim Mendiola asks, were any of these union organizing processes done in a right to work state? What advice do you have for staff trying to organize in a right to work state? Does anyone have anything to say about that?
I think we're both at will states, right, John?
Yeah, I can't speak to that.
Okay.
I mean,
yeah,
I don't know enough. I don't really know enough either. But yeah, being in an at will state, it definitely helps. And I mean, you know, it helps in the sense of like, well, I would say for anybody, whether you're in an at will state or not, if you're forming a union, you know, you can look to the state and the laws and the protections of a state that you would like to be, you know, strive towards, like those conditions. You know, we look a lot at California because we're based in California. But yeah, I mean, like if you're unionizing, you know, and then you're in a right to work state, hopefully you can kind of borrow some protections of other states that might have more labor protections. I don't know if that's necessarily true though. Of course, I'm not an expert in that really.
To move on to Alex Hulkin, who has a question about funder pushback. Are foundations who support documentary orgs creating roadblocks by threatening to pull funding if there is unionization? Or has there been outreach to funders to gain their support and leveraging that to put pressure on boards, et cetera, to support unionizing? I mean, I think, John, you can also speak to that, you know, within non-specifically documentary context too, but if there's anything to say about that.
I don't know in our case of any funder pushback. I like to think that funders would be more supportive of Anthology, knowing that we have a union and that the workers, are protected by a union. But I don't know if that's necessarily the case or not, if people funded us just because that change happened, but I don't know of us losing funding because of it.
Yeah. Maybe to move right on then, Simon Lord asks, have your union activities attracted any negative or unwelcome attention? If so, from where, what happened, and how did you deal with it?
Well, of course, we won't say anything specific about any specific people or anything like that. We of course, unionizing is a difficult decision to make, and I think it does bring personal. It could bring in personal attacks or criticisms to you publicly if it's a decision that you make. We definitely don't want to shy away from talking about the fact that there has been pressure kind of applied in that sense. But, we keep our eye on the final goal. We keep, an optimistic viewpoint of things. There's always going to be people who are against unionization. It's, against the vested interests of some people, and viewed as a personal attack. But yeah, we keep our eyes on the prize, and we know that it's worthwhile for the institutional sustainability that we want to create. And yeah, I think that the only advice I could really give is just to keep your eyes on that final goal.
Sorry.
Go ahead. If there's another question, go for it.
The other question was by, let me try and find it here in the chat, by Renee. Renee Tajima Pena. At other nonprofits, do non-management staff have a seat on the board? Is that something anyone knows about in terms of practice? I'm seeing other comments here, but yeah.
I don't think we really have any sort of response to that, but I mean, voices being heard, we're all in favor.
Yeah, I don't know how common it is for staff to be on boards of nonprofits. I think you can sometimes ask for a non-voting seat, which I kind of think every nonprofit should probably have, but that's not something we even have at Anthology. But yeah, I don't know how common it is for staff to have a voting seat on a board, a nonprofit board.
Actually, like a really interesting idea, though, John, and maybe worth exploring more. Molly Murphy from Working Film says our entire staff is always present at board meetings, but not on the actual board. And Jayasri just comments that the composition of boards are very important, which probably plenty of us know firsthand is very true. So yeah, I think we're at time. Oh wait, one more comment from Erica, which is maybe really good, is a bigger question maybe to push for more nonprofits to have largely open board meetings that staff and members can attend. Yeah, I think we would all support that and be interested in that in our own situations too. So I think with that, that's time, and I want to thank Eddie, Kristal, and John for joining us, and for also, kind of representing the opinions of also their colleagues within the DWU and the Anthology film workers as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks everyone for joining us and for your comments.